Ready, wave to the camera.
Hello.
To say that journalism can be a tough line of work to succeed in would be a massive understatement. To be a successful journalist, you have to be proficient at a myriad of different skills, from brainstorming to researching, to writing, and most importantly, communication. Good communication skills are important to a journalist for many reasons. They can strengthen your story pitches, improve the quality of your writing, and even allow for interviews to go more smoothly. However, many aspiring journalists, myself included, can attest to just how hard it can be at first to conduct a strong and meaningful interview. I've been conducting interviews since around high school now, and I definitely remember my first experiences with it being very challenging. That is why today I want to express the importance of good communication to you all by demonstrating how to properly interview someone for a news story. So let's begin by looking at the preparations you should take before you even step out into the field. A good interview does not start when you're meeting with the person you'll be questioning, but rather a good interview starts at the preparation stages. Planning ahead and preparing yourself is important because it will ensure you are not improvising your way throughout the interview, and it will also help you later on when you are outlining your questions. That's why the first step of the interview process is to do your research. This part is important because you want to try and inform yourself as much as possible on the background of the person so that the conversation between the two of you seems more natural. It will also help them to open up to you more easily. Former writer for the New York Times, Mirta Ojeda, talks about this fact, saying, "I try to know almost as much about their subject as they do, so it seems we're just chatting." Once you feel you have adequately researched the background of the person you're interviewing, as well as what you want to talk about during the interview, you can move on to the second step of the interview process, which is to create the questions. For this step, you want to focus on creating a balance between questions that are broad and more general, and questions that are more specific and straight to the point. However, you never want to open the interview with the latter kind of questions. You want to open with the broad questions that allow for conversation, because you want to make sure at the start of the interview that you are making them feel more comfortable around you and not intimidating or boring them. This is something I struggled with a lot when I was starting out, as I would oftentimes leave out questions that I could answer through the research in step one. However, I realized that including these questions are important because it helps the interview seem less like an interrogation to the other person and more like a conversation. So always make sure to include these questions as well. Along with these questions, you also want to include questions that are basic interview etiquette, such as asking for their name and the proper spelling regardless of whether you know it or not. And you want to make sure, once you have finished creating all your questions, that you go back and organize them. Oftentimes when we are creating the questions, we can jump from the broad questions to the specific questions, and it's important to go back afterwards and put them in an order that makes sense. Once you have finished these two steps, you can move on to the third and final step of the interview process, actually conducting the interview itself. When starting the interview, you want to make sure you introduce yourself appropriately as a journalist, and make sure that they are aware that everything they say to you could be made public, that they are on the record. Doing so will just make your intent clear to the other person, as well as demonstrate professionalism to them before you begin the interview. And on the topic of professionalism, make sure that your phone is on silent before you begin the interview. The last thing you want to happen is for it to go off in the middle of it and interrupt either your train of thought when asking a question, or worse, their train of thought when they're answering a question. Once you have introduced yourself, you can then begin by addressing the research you did in step one before you even ask any of your questions. By demonstrating the knowledge you have through the research you did, you can make it easier for them to be more prone to opening up to you, and you can also make them more transparent for the rest of the interview. Famous writer for the New Yorker, A.J. Liebling, talks about this fact, saying he once landed an interview with famously tight-lipped jockey Willie Shoemaker. He opened the interview with one question: "Why do you ride with one stirrup higher than the other?" Impressed by his knowledge, Shoemaker then opened up to Liebling. Once you've addressed the research you did in step one, you can then move on to asking the questions you created in step two, going one at a time and trying to remain in eye contact with them as much as possible. You can have the questions written down to read off of during the interview, but try to practice memorizing the basis of each question so that you're not constantly glancing back and forth between your paper and their eyes. Do not be afraid to diverge slightly from your outline or reword the questions once you've asked them either, as oftentimes they will sound a lot better written down than when you say them out loud, and you want to make sure your questions are as clear as possible. And finally, Do not be afraid to ask for clarification on any answer they provide you. This is another thing I struggled with when I was starting out, as I was oftentimes scared to sound dumb in front of the person I was interviewing. But as journalist Marissa Villa simply puts it, do not be afraid to ask dumb questions. Clarity is the most important thing, both in the questions you ask and the answers you record. So make sure you ask for it if necessary. Once you have finished going through all your questions, indicate you are ready to conclude the interview by politely thanking them for their time and asking them if they have any questions for you, which will usually be about how you would publish the information. And by following those 3 steps, you too can all conduct an interview with anyone. And more importantly, by being able to conduct an interview with anyone, you can all work on improving your communication skills. So let me end by saying, whether you are a journalist or not, who also wants to work on their brainstorming, research, and writing skills, good communication is an invaluable life skill regardless of your walk of life. And that's the end of my speech. I would like to open the floor to any questions you may have. Any questions at all? Yes?
Can you give us an example of a time something went wrong in one of your interviews?
Okay, an example of something that went wrong in one of my interviews. For my junior year of high school, I interviewed the valedictorian near the end of the year, and we were in the middle of the interview, and my phone went off, interrupting him in the middle of his answer. So I had the questions written down, and I was able to refer back to them when we were on, but it definitely dampened the mood and kind of damaged my credibility for the rest of the interview. So always make sure your phone is on silent. Any other questions?
So, assuming that you weren't recording them, how would you remember everything they say or write down everything they say?
Right, okay. So, assuming you don't have any audio-visual equipment and you're not recording the interview itself, the best thing I can say is always use shortcuts. Now, I'm not saying cut corners or put in less effort. I'm saying literally abbreviations, shortening of quotes. Make anything easier for you to write down the gist of what they're saying. You don't have to write down every single word they say. So long as you're not twisting the context of what they're telling you, you should be fine. Any other questions? Okay, I'd like to thank you all for your time, and I hope you all have a great day.